And so today I've invited Melissa Corkum to join us for a conversation about raising tough teens. So hi, Melissa.
Hey guys, thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. We're so excited. I appreciate you coming on. So before we get started, let me share with everybody what makes you so amazing. So besides being a transracial adoptee and transracial adoptive mom, Melissa is a certified Enneagram coach and an Empowered to Connect parent trainer. She helps dozens of parents shift to a brain-based view of behaviors so that they can find more effective solutions besides threatening and punishing. She's a mom of 6 kids by birth and adoption, all of whom are teens and young adults. They've taught her a lot about what creates thriving parent-child relationships and what doesn't. So welcome. So before we get going, I just like to ask people what started them on this journey of adoption.
Well, so as you mentioned, I'm an adult adoptee. So adoption has been part of my life for a very long time. But when I met my husband, he said 2 things to me on our first date. One was, I am looking for a wife. I'd like to be married with 2 kids by 25. And so if at any point in time you don't think you can marry me, just let me know because I'm out. Like,
wow,
not messing around. And then he said, and I've also always wanted to adopt. So if you're not in for that, you can also be out. I'm sure he said
I'm in.
I know. Well, I'm sure he said it a little bit kinder than that, but I don't know. It's kind of the way I experienced it.
Wow.
So, and I actually had never really thought about being an adoptive parent, but my logic was, well, I'm adopted. He actually didn't know I was adopted. I said, well, I'm adopted and it's been pretty good for me. So I think I'm in. And so here we are almost 20 years later.
Wow. Wow. That's awesome. And then what got you into this role of helping other parents on their walk?
So that part where you explained how my kids have taught me a lot about what creates thriving parent-child relationships and what doesn't. So all the tips and tricks and lessons I bring to you because we did it all wrong. And I love helping parents not have to go through the same hard things that we did. So we started with 2 kids by birth. They were 3 and 5, and we really thought we had this parenting thing figured out. Laughable now, right? And then we adopted our first adoption was a toddler from South Korea. And turns out he is fetal alcohol affected. And so he just challenged everything we knew about parenting. And he was the one who kind of got us looking, and we found Dr. Purvis and Empowered to Connect. And we went in 2012 and became Empowered to Connect parent trainers. It was on that time we thought, oh, now we have all the answers. And so we adopted 3 teenagers from Ethiopia, all unrelated, more or less at the same time.
Wow.
And so then we learned a whole new set of lessons, and they were out of birth order. And so what I do now really is provide support, the kind of support that we really needed 6 and 7 years ago, that we were desperately looking for. And we had, Empowered to Connect training, we had the connected child, but there were just a lot of dots that remained unconnected for us. And so we had to learn a lot of lessons the hard way. And so here we are.
I love that. I mean, I do. I just love your heart. I love your passion. I love your desire to help other people. That's, kind of why we're doing what we're doing, the same thing. I feel like, you can learn so much, and then you really need to hear from other people outside of all the training stuff. And how did this work for you, and how didn't it work for you?
Yeah.
So when I was reading some of your stuff, you talk a lot about a brain-based view of behaviors. So as we get into it, can you tell us what is a brain-based view of behaviors?
So I don't know about you guys, but I've spent a lot of time watching my kids and wondering, like, what's normal? What's just kind of like, because all kids misbehave, what's normal? What is teenager behavior? because we all know that teens kind of are their own special, age range and age group with all their own special challenges, and what's different diagnoses, like, right? Like what's ADHD, what's FASD, what's attachment challenges, and what's just complex trauma. And it's hard to dice it all out and figure out what it is. And so the neurobehavioral model kind of looks at the fact that the brain is really what's running everything all the time. And there's a lot of things that can affect that, right? Different diagnoses, different experiences. But if we really can understand the brain, the better we can understand the brain and how it drives behavior and the structure and function and all the things that influence the brain, then it doesn't really matter some of those other things. It helps simplify it, go back to the very, very root of all the things, and helps us look past what the behaviors are and think about how to accommodate things. And so if we think about like physical disabilities that have symptoms, right? Like if you are paraplegic and your symptom is you can't walk, then people give you a wheelchair, right? They help you along the way, and there's no fault associated with that. And so if we think about the brain as another physical part of the body and know that our kids have brains that are structurally and functionally different, chemically different than kind of a neurotypical brain, then we can say that, a lot of our kids have a physical disability, but behavioral symptoms, which are much trickier. But if we think about that and thinking about accommodations, then it gives us a whole new kind of world of opportunities and ways to help our kids rather than kind of fight with them all the time.
I love that. I love, in one of your podcasts, you said there are unseen disabilities, and I had never looked at it that way. And that is so helpful, just even being able to frame things in that way and being able to share that with other people. It's just a simplified way of explaining everything you just said. That is so true.
Yeah. And it's hard because we have value systems around behaviors. We believe certain things about the kinds of people who act the way that a lot of our kids are acting. And so it's really hard sometimes to get past that, to be able to help our kids the best way. And so that kind of parallel between physical disabilities has been really helpful for me, helpful for a lot of parents. I have an exercise that I do with families sometimes, or actually have them print out this little clip art of a little clip art boy in a wheelchair, and I'll have them like put it in kind of some strategic places where they'll notice it, just to kind of remind them, like, because our kids don't have often a physical way to remind us that they have this disability, right? We're looking at a kid who looks normal, but who's not acting normal.
I love that. That's, that's just a great tip for all of us to be able to do. Cause yeah, sometimes you forget, and to just have a visual. I love that you've thought of that, to give people a visual that they can just be reminded, that yes, my child has an unseen disability. That's why this behavior is happening. What is, as we start, and we're going to talk about how we should define success with teens, but just to transition to that, what is going on with our teens in the brain, and how is a teenage brain maybe different than, and a teenage brain with unseen disabilities? How is that different than what was happening in the previous years, preteen and, elementary? What changes are happening?
So we all think of hormones when we think about teenagers, which is definitely a thing. Dan Siegel wrote a fantastic book on teenagers. I think it's called Brainstorm. It has an orange or red cover. And he talks about the physical changes that happen in a teenage brain. And what basically is happening is the brain is going under construction. And so it actually almost completely deconstructs over, from a period of like age 13 to late teen years to reconstruct for adulthood, because the tools that we need in adulthood are very different than what we need, when we're in a caring household. And so that's some of what explains why just teens in general seem to kind of go off their rockers, like around 13 or 14. And it's not just hormones, but literally they're just as confused, right, as we are, because their brain is doing things that they didn't give it permission to do, and it's unwiring. And so a lot of the things we'll say, like, our kid used to be able to do that, or he used to be such a kind, kind of empathetic person, and now he's kind of this selfish whatever. It's because their brain is literally physically undergoing a lot of changes. And that's important because our kids, even without adolescence, right, already have some abnormalities to the structure and function of their brain. And they also have what we call dysmaturity. So they have a chronological age, but then they have things like their academic age and their social emotional age and their life skills age. And those tend to be all over the place. And so when we have brains that are kind of moving forward in chronological development, because it's just the way the body's wired to go, but they don't have all the skills to go along with that, then that kind of amplifies some of that teenage crazy that we often experience.
Right. So with that teenage craziness in mind, how do we define success with our teenagers? Like, what, you talk a lot about that. So help us wrap our minds around that.
Well, Tristan, I'll throw it back to you. Generally speaking, when you came into parenting, what are the things that you kind of helped you feel successful as a parent? What are some of the ways that you've defined success?
Well, I think I have both a biological son and I have an adoptive son. And so I have to define success differently for both of them. We'll just go with the adoptive son. I define success as, with him, gosh, I don't know. It's a good question because I want to say, is he maybe responding to some of the things that we're talking to him about, like whether it's being introspective and being able to acknowledge when he's wrong, to be able to have empathy and say sorry. So I guess it's, I'm not sure. That's one. I mean, I'm thinking it's probably behavior based, but in a different way than what I would say with my other son, a different set of behaviors.
Yeah.
It's more relational success is what I think of,
Yeah. Well, and when I chat with parents, that's a lot of times where we start, right? It's kind of child-based. We want them to be successful. We want them to be able to be in healthy relationships. And those are all great things, and they're all great things when they happen. The problem is if we define our success as parents that way, because we don't really have control over how our kids will take what we're imparting on them, the love, the connection, the attachment, all those things. We don't know what they're going to do with that. They could reject it. They could embrace it. They could take bits and pieces of it. They could make good decisions today and bad decisions tomorrow and bad decisions the next day and good decisions the next day. It kind of leaves us on this crazy roller coaster. And that's how we defined success for a long time. And I was fighting for this definition of success that caused me to kind of want to control my kids more than really I could, right? I was kind of fighting for this. And so I really encourage parents to define success by something that they can control, that they're 100% in control of. And oftentimes what that allows us to do is, one, have a working definition of success really for our whole family, because it's not child specific, right? It's us specific. We're the parents, regardless of all the different things that our kids may or may not be going through. And a lot of times when I ask folks, right, they do what you did, right? They're kind of like, well, they think they know, but they're not quite sure. And so I really think that that's one of the first things we have to do, because especially with teens, when there's so many gray areas and we're in this like tug of war for they want their independence, right? And we still kind of want to be able to protect them and have some control, is we know that we can't fight all the battles. Or I don't know, maybe we don't know. I certainly acted like I needed to fight them all, right? First time around. And so if we don't have a really great working definition of success, then we don't have a filter for which battles we're going to fight. Should I fight a food battle, or should I fight a screen time battle, or should I fight a clothing battle? And if we don't have this working definition of success, then we don't know how to answer that question.
I love that. So it sounds like what you're saying is, by defining that, or let me know, like, are you saying like, well, it was a successful day because we didn't have any major meltdowns, or my son was able to successfully do a redo? Is that what you're talking about as far as defining it? Like what?
So those things are still child-based, right? What
Yeah.
your child did. So I talk about big picture success and smaller daily success. So big picture success is kind of like at the when so what happened with us is we fought all the wrong battles, and our kids at 16 and 17, our two oldest kids, were like, yeah, just kidding, we didn't actually want to be adopted, peace out, we're out. Like, and they didn't want to talk to us anymore, and they really rejected us for some good reasons, quite honestly. But then so we were left with like, so now what? And so we had to kind of come back to the drawing board, and with the help of our therapist, and we said, okay, so success isn't behavior, right? Because if we're fighting all the battles to get them to act and behave a certain way, it's not getting us anywhere. So for us, we decided that our definition of success one of them was going to be that we would be a safe place for them to land, no matter how big their mess ups were. That's what we wanted, that we wanted to be open to relationship, no matter what their behavior was. And so that changed a lot of the opinions that we would communicate or not communicate to them. It really changed everything about our relationship. On a daily thing, right? It's not, are we going to have a meltdown today? Because we can influence that, right? But we can't really control it, because we've had a child in our house that if we were Karen Purvis in the flesh, this child still would have melted down, right?
Right. Yeah.
So then success becomes, what am I doing to regulate my own self? Did I do the things? Did I go on a walk? Did I eat the right foods? Did I get respite? Did I take a break? Did I do the active things that I need to do to be a great parent, and take how my child behaves or reacts out of the picture? So my daily definition of success might be, did I smile, even at my hardest kid? Did I greet them with a smile every morning? And whether or not she, says something nasty to me or rejects it or whatever, that's can't be the part of the definition, but I did my part. I offered the connection, I offered attachment, and then the ball's in their court.
That's great. That's just so helpful. I think a lot of people will appreciate hearing your definitions of success in your family. As far as being a safe place, we all want to be, as when our kids get to be teenagers, that safe place, because especially our kids, we're not quite sure what direction they're going to go in life. And so we want to be able to be those people that they come to for help when they do get into trouble. So I love that is one of your overriding things that you kind of influence your daily living through. And then I love that you have some specifics, and they're based on you. Like, how successful are you? Are you doing what you need to do? Because we talk so much about self-care and the need for that, especially right now. Our kids are so needy, and we're I think a lot of us have shifted in the last, few weeks to recognize, like, hey, I need to take care of myself. Like, yes, my kid has a ton of needs, but if I don't, like you said, take that walk every day, do a free yoga class, whatever it is, take some time for myself, then I am not going to be able to respond in the way that I need to respond to them. So I love that you have big picture and then bring it back to us.
Yeah. And I will say, in terms of being a safe place for your kids to come back to, really the thing that trumps all of that is safety. So there are certain situations where we can't be the safe place physically, where our house can't be the place where our kids will always be able to come back to, because the other thing that we learned is we have to put boundaries around our family's safety, and we have to look at the big whole family dynamic. We can't sacrifice everybody for one or two kids. But whenever possible, right, we have been that safe place, and we can be the safe place even if they can't live with us. We can still be a place where they can talk, or we can have a relationship. And that has changed a lot, right? Even how we react to what our kids are doing. They might say something and we might be thinking, oh, terrible idea, or what are you thinking, right? But we realized that if we were that safe place where they had to come back, we had to keep a lot of those opinions to ourselves and let them learn a lot of lessons the hard way. Because if we were the naysayers, or the ones to say, I don't know if that's a good idea, and then it failed, then we're not the safe place to come back to, because then they're afraid they're going to get an I told you so. Right. So we had to start being silent for a lot of big decisions. And so that, depends on whether your teen's a 13-year-old, right, or a 19-year-old. You have to kind of make some adjustments here and there, but it is a radical shift in parenting, and it's radically changed even how we've parented our kids by birth.
Yeah, so someone's asking a question that I think fits in right now that I can't see who it is, but it's saying, as far as being a safe place, how do you handle when they tell you things that they're doing that are really concerning, like drinking, sexual behaviors, and stuff like that? You were kind of, I think, talking a little bit about that when you were saying, you can't tell them everything because you don't want to be the person that is, back to the I told you so, and then they don't want to come back after they find out that wasn't going the best. Or maybe they don't. Like, how do you navigate that? How do you navigate when they're making choices that you can see are not the best choices for them, and maybe they don't care?
Yeah. So a lot of it depends on age of your child and kind of what it is and what that means for the rest of the family. So things like drinking, if they're not doing it in your house, then, and depending on how, if they're 13, obviously the law is going to have something to say about you as a parent, letting your child do that. But if they're 17, even though they're really not people aren't really going to come after you as a parent, right? So that's kind of, that's probably not a battle I would fight, right? Like, screen time, porn, all that stuff. Like, we have chosen to just take a step back from a lot of those things. Now, if your son or daughter is inviting unsafe people into your actual home, right? That's a totally different thing. If they're bringing illegal substances into your home, then that's something, right? Like, that puts your entire family at risk. That's a safety thing. But we have had, we have a daughter who is now back living with us. And she's 21 now, but she was 19 and pregnant when she came back, right? And she was doing a lot of things that we wouldn't have advised her to do when she wasn't living with us. And we knew a lot about it, and we knew that there were going to be very big consequences for some of those actions. But they have to learn some of their lessons the hard way, unless they're asking you for advice. You giving advice is unfortunately going to just kind of create a bigger chasm. And it's hard. I mean, I'm saying it like it's easy, and it's not. It's obviously very hard. And I think for those of you who are faith-based, like, this is faith, right? Like, we serve a God who loves our kids more than we do. And he's going to be with them and walk with them and possibly protect them in ways that we'll never imagine. And he may let them learn some lessons that we would prefer that they hadn't had to learn that way.
Yeah, I always think about my own son and remind myself, like, both of them, they're not my own. They're on loan to me from God, and my job is to parent them, but ultimately they're his children, just like I'm a child of God. And they all have their own story. I have my own story, and he has a story for each of them. And that's going to be beyond me. So I kind of like what you're saying. So in that, like, how do we pick and choose which battles we're going to fight?
Yeah. I want to, Helen asked a question or made a comment. I thought that I want to just throw out there. What happens when you have younger children and you're trying to prevent bad choices that older kids are making, trying to influence younger kids? I think, again, every family is going to have to make their own decision. For us, we have let the cards play out, and our kids have watched them make those decisions, but also watched them have the consequences of their decisions. So it's a riskier decision for sure. But there's nothing like having a real life example of the things that you would want to tell your kids, right? If you do this, then this might happen. We have kind of a bonus son, if you will. He was a young man who aged out of Baltimore's foster care system, who stayed with us for about a year. And he's like another member of the family. And he didn't follow some of the safety guidelines that we had in our house. And so we did have to ask him to leave at one point, to not live with us anymore. And it took about 3 weeks, and he ended up arrested and is now serving time in federal prison. And so there's nothing like a real life example of, if you can't learn how to follow the rules, that there's real life consequences to these things. Like now, our youngest son, who's super impulsive and really has trouble following the rules, like has a real life example of someone who didn't follow the rules and ended up in jail. And all of our other kids who, we may worry about, alone time with boyfriends and girlfriends, like they have a really real example, because their older sister came home pregnant and is now responsible for a baby. So, there's kind of two sides to every coin. And again, every family is going to have to make their decisions, and you have to know your kids and kind of what their tendencies are. But that's how that's kind of played out in our family.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate you just being transparent with us too, and just showing us and telling us, your real life situation and how this all plays out, that it's not just a theory, but you are living it, and you're living it out. And there's two sides, like you said, to every coin. I appreciate that, and a lot of it is our perspective and our attitude and what we're bringing into it. So back to with that, how do we decide? How do you decide, like, what battles we are going to fight? What ones are worth it? And how do we go about that so that battle, I don't know, is maybe not, I don't know, that battle, I don't want to say successful, but is worth it, the risk of possibly damaging the relationship? Or it sounds like you've had to make some hard decisions, and they're probably not always battles, but they're tough decisions that you have to make. And I'm sure you've experienced a lot on both sides of those decisions, them having positive outcomes and then also heartbreak on the other side.
Yeah. So, once you have your definition of success, then you kind of look at a battle and you think, is this battle, is this thing that I want to stand on? Is it going to move me towards my definition? One of our other definitions of success right now is that we'll provide a place for our kids to be. Again, safety trumps everything. This is assuming everyone can be safe. We'll provide a place for our kids as long as they need it, and that we believe that they will launch when they're ready. And so that has meant, and we've had to learn this the hard way too. We've had, both of my siblings have moved back as adults to live with us. And of course, now we have one of our older daughters living with us who probably won't launch anytime soon. And so by the world's standards, that doesn't look like success. She's 21, parenting a baby girl, and doesn't have a job. And that doesn't look like success for a lot of families. But because our definition of success is about what we can do, we can provide her a safe place to raise her baby, and that we believe that when she is ready, like that this is a skill, not a will thing, right? That when she can pull all the pieces together, and she's a kid from a hard place herself, then she'll live here, like that she doesn't want to live here forever necessarily. That she'll be able to move on. And so that means that we're not going to fight battles about whether or not she has a job. We're not going to fight battles about how long she spends on her phone or watching TV, when she could be sleeping, and then how she complains all day that she's tired when she's, chasing a 15-month-old. And it means that we are trying really hard not to stick our noses into her parenting, even though she's raising a baby right in front of us, and making some decisions that we might not want to make. And unless they're endangering her or the baby, then we are trying as best as we can to keep our mouth shut, unless she asks, you know, Mom, what would you do if you were in this situation?
Wow. So I just imagine that being really hard.
It is. It's a muscle, though. It's something we've been working on for a little over 5 years now, since we've kind of redefined success, and we're both on the same page. So my husband and I have had conversations about this, and we're on the same page. So when I start getting nitpicky about what the baby's eating, you know, he'll say to me, "It's not our battle to fight." You know, and we also know that if we get too nitpicky, we could drive them away before they're ready into a situation that maybe isn't super safe or isn't super ideal. And so always trying to look at what the benefits are. We tend, you know, all have a natural negativity bias. You know, if you've taken any psychology, right, we're looking for the negative. We have to try really hard to look for the positive. And so there are a lot of really good things happening by having her here and having the baby surrounded by so many people who love and care for her and who can fill in the gaps. And so, yeah, I mean, that's just one example of where we have really defined success, and we have to try really hard to filter those kind of day-to-day things through it.
And one of the things that you said that I also appreciate, because it's so easy to fall into, is that you don't worry about other people's definition of success, that it may not look like success to them on the outside, but they have no idea on the inside, what, you know, I mean, for one, what your definition of success is. And it doesn't matter, you know, it's so easy for us to compare ourselves and our family dynamics with other people without really knowing everything. So I like that you just kind of tune that out. It doesn't matter what other people define as a success. And for us and, you know, our family, this is how we're defining it. And this is what we're going to live by. And that you have that bigger picture, long-term goal in mind.
Yeah. Yeah. And what that looks like right now is we have a 17-year-old who's a junior in high school. And again, definition for our whole family is that we're going to be a safe place, and we're not going to pick battles that are going to drive our kids away. And so he currently is video gaming probably, I don't know, 16 hours a day. And the time that he's sleeping is like, he finally goes to bed around like 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. And sometimes he wakes up in time for dinner. And that's not our battle to fight. And I'm crossing my fingers that he's going to show up for his AP test next week, but he might sleep through them. I really don't know.
So how does it work for you? I mean, do you guys have this loving connection then? I mean, what's the payout?
The payout is currently we have a 13, a 14, a 17, and a 21-year-old living at home. And actually our son, who's 22, decided that he wants to hang out here until the pandemic's over. So he came home earlier this week. That they're choosing, the ones that can choose, are choosing to be here. That our 14-year-old still hangs out with us every night. She doesn't have to. She spends a lot of time in her room for sure, but we're all watching a show together and she really enjoys that. Our 17-year-old, when we need him, he is absolutely there. We live with my parents as well. My parents have an apartment in our house, and if they need something, he's kind of our tech department. He's our super nerdy kid. So if their printer breaks or they can't get something to work and they text him and they need him, he's absolutely there. And it also means that if I ask something of him, he'll do it, because I don't ask very much. I take those deposits very carefully. And I have 2 or 3 things a year that are very important to me. Not even important to my husband, really important to me, some family things. And so we don't enforce family dinner anymore. We always invite, it's always there. But there are a couple things that are really important to me that I really want him to show up for. And he does without complaining every time. But we don't ask very often. And we yeah, so there's just a lot of freedom, and that means that when we do pull our card where we have to pull a parent card, there he's listening.
Nice. So, Michelle's asking then, so what kind of boundaries do you have for the kids who live at home?
It's about safety mostly.
Okay.
As long as you're not physically or emotionally abusing other people in the home, that's really it. I mean, I can't see the boys' bedroom floor. There may or may not be a pest problem there. I'm pretty sure there isn't, but there could be, and I wouldn't know about it. Generally speaking, right now we don't have anyone who's being super disrespectful of other people's space. So more or less, people in the living area of our house, we don't have a very big house, so there's not a lot of living space, but more or less that stuff is cleaned up. And if it's not, like, I'll just throw it away. So it is what it is. Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, just kind of give everyone, some respect and some space. Someone asked about back talk and power struggles. We've definitely been there, without giving into behavior. I liken it to, like, if someone comes into a store and wants to steal something and you're like, hey, dude, you don't have to steal it. I'll just give it to you. Kind of that, like, you don't do it in the moment, right? You don't want to do it in the middle of if you've started a battle, you might have to retreat and say, we need to step back and think about this. But to come back and say, hey, I've been thinking about this and I've decided that we're making an intentional decision. My dad and I thought about this, or I've thought about this, and I can see why this would be hard for you. And I've also decided that I don't want to sacrifice a relationship on this thing. And so I've decided that I'm not going to fight you on this anymore. So that it's not a reactionary, like, fine, just do it. Right. But it's a very intentional, I've given this some thought, and our decision is we're going to give this ground back to you.
I like how you put that. I like, we've had to make those decisions too, where we let go of things, recognizing that it was more of a control issue on our part and really had nothing to do with anything other than that, like the clean room thing or whatever. And I like that you're saying, that we don't, not to come to it as a, like, fine, like, whatever kind of reactionary, knowing that we've already made that decision, but to have that conversation with them and let them know that, hey, I've come to this decision, that you are giving that power. It's like shared power, you're giving it back to them, saying, like, I recognize that I'm holding this power trip and I don't need to. And there you go. It's back, I'm going to let go of that.
Yeah. JC and Carrie asked similar questions. How do we get them to become responsible adults? Right. I think, it's counterintuitive, but if we're safe people, right, they're going to know, they're not stupid. They're going to know, that they can come to us when they figure out that they need to. And sometimes they need to hit rock bottom. So this is another one of our definitions, part of our family definition of success. We truly believe that kids will launch if they can. And I was having a conversation with my husband about this recently, that I always believe that lazy is communicating something different than I'm just lazy. We weren't created by God to be lazy. And I think lazy is a self-protective kind of shutdown mechanism when we either feel overwhelmed or we don't have all the accommodations and support that we need, or we don't feel safe, or a whole bunch of different things. And our experience has been, when some of that scaffolding occurs and they can get the support, they will launch. Like, so my sister moved back in when she was about 30 and she was pregnant, and she lived here for almost 5 years. And we didn't foresee anything. She didn't have a job while she was here. We didn't really foresee, like, any end in sight. And then all of a sudden she met a great guy and pulled herself together and was able to launch. And we've seen it with our other kids that they kind of come to their, they know what it means to be an adult. They don't actually need us to tell them sometimes, right? Like they know that being an adult means to hold a job, and they might not like fully really embody that or understand it, but in their heads they know, right? So it just, they figure it out. Like our son spent a lot of years staring at his bedroom wall. I was like, are you ever going to get motivated to do anything? And now he's one of Amtrak's youngest conductors ever, and he owns a small business. And he came home to volunteer to help my husband finish our bathroom, and he drywall sanded and mudded almost around the clock for the last 3 days, completely volunteer. And I know all the stories don't turn out that way. Our 17-year-old didn't shower for like, I swear it was like 3 years. And then all of a sudden he decided he liked a girl. And so now he just showers when he wants to see her. I mean, so like they're going to figure it out at some point. But I think there's a fear, right, that if we don't push, that they're going to get stuck. And it just hasn't been true for our family. We're looking at 3 different young adults right now. And some of them had to hit rock bottom, and even the bonus kid in jail, he's coming to a lot of conclusions about, I'm actually going to sit down and study for my GED. He's 3/4 of the way there. And we fought over that when he was here. You have to get your education. You have to get your GED, sit down and study, blah, 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 blah. Right. And so now 6 years later and a jail sentence, he's like, I should really get my GED. I already studied and passed 3 of the tests. I mean, great. Perfect.
Oh, I'm a preschool administrator, or was. I don't know what
what you ever will
right
do
now.
again. Yeah.
Yes, I don't know what that is. But people would stress about the potty training thing. And I would always say, they're going to get potty trained. Like, it's okay. They're not going to go to college and still be wet in the beds. They're going to potty train. It's going to work itself out. At some point, they're going to be self-motivated, and it's going to happen. And so it sounds like you're kind of saying, something similar in that same attitude, that at some point it's going to happen. They're not going to want to just stay at home for the rest of their lives and live with mom and dad.
Right. Yeah. It's just, like if they can, they're going to leave. They don't want to do that forever. And if they want that level of support, right, there's something else going on.
So Casey's asking, or Carrie Kirk, how is all the freedom balanced with teaching skills to launch? I think that question kind of fits in right now with where we're at in this conversation.
So you teach when they're willing, right? I think a lot of times we force our teaching, right? You will learn how to do this before you leave. And one of our life lessons, we homeschooled for a while. We homeschooled all 6 for a while, which is just dumb in hindsight, but it was what it was. And so I'm a stickler, right, for punctuation and grammar, all the things. And our son was applying for a job, and I got an email copy of his email application, because at the time I was playing my control card. So I saw everyone's emails incoming and outgoing. And he didn't punctuate. He didn't use one single punctuation mark, and he didn't capitalize a single thing on the entire application. It was a McDonald's application, and they called him 45 minutes later for an interview. They did a phone interview, and 16 minutes later he had a job. And I just thought, all the things that I think that kids need in life, all the skills that I'm like desperately trying to instill, it's just not all the drama that I'm making it out to be. And I had this conversation with him. I said, look, dude, I said, you just taught me a lesson. Like, we've been fighting this battle about English, and, our kids came to us not speaking English. And I said, look, you've just proved me wrong. Like, clearly you can get a job without half the things that I'm trying to tell you. I said, but there is a glass ceiling. So I'm telling you can get a job. You just proved that. But I'm telling you probably won't be a doctor, which is okay. So you decide. This is the kind of job you can get if you want to stop learning from me. Or if you want to keep learning, you can keep learning. And what we've also found is our kids know that we can teach, that we have the skills. And so as they're starting to launch and they're taking baby steps, right? So now our 22-year-old lives in an apartment in DC by himself. And he's realizing it's really expensive to eat out all the time, right? So now we're getting calls like, that thing you used to make, right? How do I make that? What's the recipe for that? Right? Like, so I couldn't teach it to him while he was here, but he knows what he needs. Like, he's coming across things that he needs to know, right? And we're the safe place to come back to. So because we sacrifice some of those hills, those battles while he, before, now when he does hit those bumps in the road, instead of being like, oh, I don't have anyone to call, because if I call mom and dad, they're just going to lecture me about how I never listened to their cooking lessons when I was at home. I should have listened at the beginning. Now we can just call and say, hey, now I'm ready. How do I do that thing? Or I've had another daughter call and say, those vitamins used to try to shove down my throat. Like, I figured out that I probably need a supplement. Can you tell me which ones that you really like?
So someone's asking, how does that play out with faith? Like helping establish our faith with our kids. So how does that play out? Do you make your kids go to church? Like, what is it the same? I'm kind of sensing you're gonna say, I could pretty much
can you tell?
answer for you.
Like, no, we don't make them because we can't force our kids' faith, right? And that's one of the hardest things about this journey. We can live it out. We can pray for them. We can show Jesus to them, but we can't force it. And we have to love them regardless of what they're thinking about our faith. And honestly, we have one kid who told me the other day she's praying that we'll become better Christians. So I don't know, maybe we're not the right ones to impart faith on our kids anyway.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, with our oldest son, he doesn't enjoy going to church anymore. He never whatever. We entice him with lunch after church. So we're hoping that he gets church, but really what he wants is lunch afterwards, but we try to get it snuck in there. So
and of course, right, the topic here is teens, right? If you have a 5-year-old at home, I'm not saying tell your 5-year-old they don't have to go to,
right.
There's a time and a place, right, to be the parents who have a little bit more control over the situation, right? Like, we read a Bible story with our 15-month-old granddaughter every night, and we pray with her, and that's required for her pretty much, right? But we're talking about these teens, and if your teens came to you as teens, right, we have a lot of relationship capital to work on. We don't have that foundation that we have with kids who have been with us for a long time, and that's what our kids were. 11, 13, and 14 when they came home. They'd already lived a lot of life. They'd already made a lot of decisions, decided a lot of things about the world, and you can't. Trust me, I tried. You cannot forcibly change those paradigms.
Right. So it looks like, do we have any more questions?
So there was a question about from registration. Max said, someone asked, I have my 12-year-old has diagnosed with RAD. Will medication help with anger issues, or do you recommend EMDR alone? Really a case-by-case basis. I don't know if that person's live here, but if you want to message me or connect with me on social media afterwards, we can start a private conversation kind of about that.
Okay. We're gonna, I think we'll look at this one last question, and then we're gonna kind of wrap things up. And I always have 3 ending questions I ask everybody, but it looks like another question for registration. How do we emotionally thrive in a negative environment? So that's a great question, because it seems like you are thriving. Like, just your attitude and the way that you kind of are looking at it, it seems like you are doing your self-care. So how do you do that if you're having all these crazy, I don't know, like a room that's a disaster, this person's doing what they want, or
a lot of therapy, a lot of prayer, a lot of community, exactly, being here with people who understand it, having someone, whether it's a spouse or a good friend, you can say like, this thing's going to drive me crazy, trying to let it out to someone else who's not your kid. And I don't do this perfectly by any stretch of the imagination. I think, we have a lot of power. We give behavior a lot of power. We can also take the power away. And we've lived with Eeyores, we've lived with negative Nellies, we've lived with kids who are really, really aggressive. And so that goes back to, is it kind of just a negativity? Is it like a kid who never wants to do anything, who might have a little depression, and that's like we have to work on ourselves and how we can, kind of be strong against that? Or is it really a child who is really threatening the safety in our home? Because that's clearly a thing too. And so for us, one of our definitions of success for a long time was that we could keep everyone safe here, that we had adopted them and we could fix them. And that's not true. And so our story involves, having a child who needed levels of care that we couldn't provide, out of home treatment, long-term respite, things that before I would have told you made me a complete failure as an empowered to connect parent trainer. How could we be trained by Dr. Karen Purvis, and have a child who couldn't live here? So, that goes back to that safety thing. Our definition of success has to be that we can't sacrifice 5 other kids just to keep one. For our definition of success, that we have to be able to do it all.
Right. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I couldn't do this without a community either. I so appreciate what you do in the communities that you influence, and that you're willing to invite other people into your life. It sounds like you're just that kind of person when you describe, yeah, this person's at home, and then, oh, my siblings and my parents are.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you're just kind of that kind of person that welcomes people into your life. And so I just really appreciate that you do that. And I know that you have a website and Instagram and Facebook page and group and all these things, and we're going to make sure that everybody has the connections to all those things in our follow-up email. But I do want to ask you, it sounds like I'm wrapping it up, but I'm not. I'm just saying I love that you're about connection and helping people. And I know for myself, without a support group and without a community like this, I couldn't do it. And I just want everybody to know on this call, if they're not plugged in anywhere, that there are places that you can plug in, and that you're not alone in this walk, that there are other people who understand you and are not here to judge you. They're just here to support you.
Yeah.
So with that said, Melissa, what brings you joy?
Right now, our granddaughter, she's like at that stage where she's like repeating all the words, and we're teaching her sign language, and I don't know. So we like baby therapy. So, there's a silver lining to, all the other hard things that come with that, but she's super cute and we all really love her a lot.
Oh, I love that you're teaching her sign language. It's so fun. All right. So if you could say one thing to your younger self when you first started this adoption journey, what would it be?
Probably to just, lose the control thing. I'm a control freak. I feel like I need like an AA meeting for like control freak, like, hi, I'm Melissa and I'm a control freak. Like every morning I probably need to get up and like have a meeting with someone. Oh. My husband would say I'm not really as close to recovery as I'd like to think I am, but
that's true for us all. All right. And then the last question is, what foster adoption myth would you like to just blow up right now?
I think the biggest thing for me, especially as an empowered to connect parent trainer, is I believed for a long time, once I put away the like timeouts will fix everything kind of consequence mentality, once I learned about behavior and meeting needs, it was super empowering. But I think, again, to the control point, I believed that, we had the tools to help our kids heal, like Dr. Purvis would say. But then I also believe the reverse of that if our kids weren't doing well, that I was to blame. Like I didn't talk with a, cute Southern accent, I hadn't gotten the total voice control down. I hadn't given enough choices. I hadn't given enough voice. I hadn't given enough compromise. And I just kept thinking I need to do more and more and more and more of that if the results aren't what I need. And honestly, like I almost had a mental breakdown. Like my bags were packed for, the local mental health hospital. My husband was like, you either need to go check yourself in or something needs to change. Yeah. And so I just encourage parents that, if you're looking at your kids and you feel like you're doing all the things right and you still feel like everything's wrong with what's going on with them, it doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong. I mean, there's always things about us that we can change, but I think we give ourselves too much credit for how much control we can have, especially with teens and young adults.
Yeah, I hear that. And I fell into that trap myself. So I appreciate you bringing that to light, that there is a point where we can't blame ourselves for our kids' lack of growth or maturity or whatever you want to call it, change or whatever. And that's kind of where I started to come to the conclusion, like, this child ultimately is God's, and he's got his own story. And I'm just going to try to be like what you're saying. I'm just going to try to be there and walk beside him. And it's me and him against his history. And it's not me and him against each other because of his history. And so I really appreciate you sharing that. I'm sure there's other people on this call who feel that same way. They feel like failures because of their kids. And so I like that you are telling us that we can redefine success. And I know that you have a freebie on your website, thecorkboardonline.com/replenish, which Max put up in the chat room. That's a free parent success plan, and it's a training. You have some worksheets and videos for us, and that link is just special for our Replenish people. So I appreciate you doing that for us, so we can continue the work that you started here and the ideas that you have given us, so that we can help redefine what that means. So we don't have to define our success based on our kids' behavior, based on what we think the world thinks of them.
Yeah. Well, and I'll also say that a lot of times it can feel hopeless. Like, our kids are 17, 18, we're running out of time, and this is it. If we don't fix it before they're 18, it's over. And I'll say, part of the story with my siblings even, and with our older kids, we have had years of disconnection and dysfunction. And I've seen God turn around relationships that were 10 years dead. And so I think it's easy to think like this is the end. We had a child say to us, I'm done. I remember I told you I'm done with you. Like every time we'd reach out, remember I told you I'm done with you, for years. And I just thought, that's it. Like, we're going to look back and we're going to think like that was a nice 3 years we had with that particular child. But it's not over till it's over, And so it might be years and years down the road. And for one of our stories, it was a decade. So I just encourage everyone that there's always hope, and to keep pressing on, to keep reaching out, even if it's rejected.
Yeah, there's always hope. So I have just a few announcements to make. And then I want to also invite everybody to stay in the after party. So after Melissa leaves, I'm going to hang out for another half hour with you guys. It's been a fun conversation that we've had, and it's kind of a community that we're forming. So I love it. So I just want to let people know that about your podcast, The Adoption Connection. If you are not already listening to that podcast, it's an amazing podcast. Melissa does that with Lisa Qual, who will be on next week. She's the co-host for the Adoption Connection podcast. And the week after that, we're going to have Darren Jones. He is a TBRI specialist from the Karen Purvis Institute of Child Development from TCU. And yeah, so I just really want to thank you for coming on and helping us understand tough teens. Every time I have somebody on, I feel like it just expands my world and my mind gets a little bit blown. So I just really appreciate it. I know it really helps me, and I know if it's helping me, it's got to be helping other people too. So just thank you for coming on and being brave and answering questions and being willing to share your experience with us.
Well, I am really privileged to be here. You guys have an amazing community. Thanks for what you're doing and offering to the adoption community. And yeah, we always end our podcast by telling parents they're good parents doing good work. So I just wanted to leave with that. And I'm just grateful to be able to use, to redeem our story by helping others. So it's a privilege for me as well.
Great. Well, thank you all who called in this week to the Replenish Zoom. Remember that we're all on this journey together and we're not alone, and you are not alone. And I hope that you feel replenished as a result of our conversation today. Don't forget to join us on our private Facebook group for parents, Safe, Precious, and Heard, and stick around for the after party. And remember that there's no such thing as a perfect parent, only a growing parent. Thanks, Melissa. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, guys.
So stick around if you want. People are going to start dropping off. Next, can you turn that fan on? I got awfully hot. Whew. So that was a pretty amazing conversation.